What kind of disaster movie actually dares to treat the destruction of all mankind as the grand finale? The disaster details predicted in the film are terrifyingly realistic. You will absolutely never guess the ending until the very last second. To showcase the destructive scenes of solar flare eruptions, the production crew specially hired an astrophysics professor as a scientific consultant. This ensured that every astronomical coordinate, sunspot data, and even the collapse reaction of the Earth's magnetic field in the film fully complied with the real laws of physics. It portrays the helplessness of humans in the face of the universe extremely vividly. After watching this movie, my biggest feeling is despair. How a rational astronomy professor was driven step by step to the collapse of his faith by a broken piece of paper full of numbers. However, the reason he tried so hard to crack this garbled code was not to act as a hero, but to save his son's life when the doomsday arrived. Now let's see what kind of curse is hidden in this broken paper that has been sealed for 50 years. A girl named Lucinda has a very solitary personality. On this day in the examination hall, not only did she not answer the questions, but she took a pencil and wrote numbers frantically on the paper. The speed was so fast that she broke several pencil tips in succession. The teacher came to stop her, but she seemed possessed and had no reaction at all. The teacher could only forcibly take the paper away, but this was not the end. Before long, Lucinda disappeared mysteriously. Everyone searched for a whole day and finally found her in the school basement. At this time, Lucinda was sitting on the ground with her hands covered in blood. Not only did she not stop, but she used her bloody fingers to gouge out words on the door panel. She kept muttering, "Stop it," in her mouth. The teacher originally thought the girl had mental problems. Little did they know that this string of numbers was actually the death ledger of humans' future. Lucinda didn't want to write these, but a voice in her head kept forcing her. That feeling of helplessness, watching billions of people die miserably in the future while being unable to do anything, forced a child into a dead end. That is the despair of knowing the truth, but no one believing it. A little girl was forced to carry the death countdown of all mankind. This kind of mental pressure is more cruel than any physical torture. In a flash, 50 years later, the school dug up the time capsule from that year. The drawings inside were distributed to new students as gifts. A young boy named Caleb happened to get the paper filled with numbers written by Lucinda. Caleb couldn't understand it at all and gave it to his father, who was an astronomy professor, when he got home. John is very sensitive to numbers. He casually wrote a row of numbers on the whiteboard. He tried adding a few decimal points to the numbers. A shocking date appeared instantly. That was the 9/11 event in 2001, and the numbers behind were exactly the number of victims in that disaster. John suddenly became interested. He typed all the numbers on the paper into the computer. The result made him feel a sense of suffocation. Major disasters that happened globally in the past 50 years, whether it was the time, location, or the number of deaths, could all be found precisely on this paper. There wasn't even a slight error. These pure numbers without punctuation and spaces on the paper are called featureless ciphertext in cryptography. Ordinary people's naked eyes simply cannot distinguish effective information. The reason why John could see the clues at a glance is because astronomers need to process a large amount of overlapping stellar orbital coordinate data all year round. They have a professional muscle memory for number blocking and pattern recognition that ordinary people do not have. However, just when John thought he had deciphered the heavenly secret, an accident happened. As an astronomy professor, John had always believed that science could explain everything, but he found that there were still 3 dates on the paper that had not been fulfilled. The most recent one was just 2 days later. John hurriedly told his colleague about the discovery, but the colleague thought he was crazy and didn't take it seriously at all. To verify whether it was true or false, John went out to pick up his son on the day of the prophecy. He encountered a serious traffic jam on the road. He inadvertently looked down at the car navigation. The latitude and longitude on it perfectly matched that long string of unsolved numbers on the paper. John got out of the car and wanted to ask the police in front. But before the policeman could speak, his face suddenly turned pale, and he turned and ran back. In the next second, a huge passenger plane crashed directly onto the highway. The powerful impact flipped all the cars in an instant. John was terrified, but he still instinctively rushed into the sea of fire to save people. All around were passengers who had been turned into fireballs, and screams were everywhere. John wanted to save people, but a secondary explosion suddenly occurred in front. He He could only watch helplessly as that person was swallowed by the fire. This plane crash scene can be said to be the most oppressive part of the entire film. After this incident, John was finally convinced of the reality of the prophecy, but little did he know that the gears of disaster had just begun to turn. In order to find out the truth, John found Lucinda's daughter, Diana. He originally wanted Diana to help find clues to stop the disaster together, but Diana was extremely resistant. She didn't want to get involved in her mother's weird past at all, and left directly. In desperation, John could only work alone. He made an anonymous call to the police in advance based on the coordinates of the next prophecy, saying that there would be a gap at the subway station. On that day, John personally ran to the subway station to keep watch. He found a man in a black hat looking panicked. Without a word, John chased after him. The two ran wildly through the crowd. This scene attracted the transit police. The policeman took out his weapon and slowly approached the man in the black hat. The man was so scared that he raised his hands, and the things in his pockets fell all over the ground. It turned out he was just a thief. John thought he had caught the wrong person, and the crisis was over. Just then, the subway track switcher suddenly failed. A train full of passengers derailed instantly. Like a violent steel beast, it crashed straight into the opposite platform. Dozens of tons of scrap metal crushed the crowd in an instant. John was pushed to the ground by the crowd and narrowly escaped death. The reason why the destruction of the subway derailment is so tragic is because of the law of conservation of momentum. The total weight of a fully loaded train can reach hundreds of tons. In the case of a hard rollover at a speed of 80 kilometers per hour, the physical shock wave generated instantly is equivalent to the explosion of several tons of TNT. The reinforced concrete on the platform is no different from tofu in front of such huge energy. At this time, Diana happened to see the live broadcast of the subway tragedy on TV. She then realized that everything John said was true. She took the initiative to contact John. Several people rushed to the old house of her mother, Lucinda, trying to find clues for the final disaster. But they didn't gain much after searching the whole house. John found many black stones under the bed. He also flipped the bedboard over. The result was that he was scared back repeatedly by the letters carved on it. It turned out that the last prophecy had no coordinates. What was carved on it was not some person's initials, but represented everyone. In other words, the last disaster is the end of the world. This setting is cold to the extreme. No matter how humans struggle or how they develop technology, in the face of the absolute power of nature, they are, after all, just a group of lambs waiting to be slaughtered. On the other side, the two children waiting in the car were also restless. A mysterious man in black quietly approached the car. He muttered strange language in his mouth, wanting to take the children away. John heard the movement and rushed out. He took out his gun and went to chase the man in black. With great difficulty, he blocked the person in an open space. John shouted and asked what the other party wanted to do, but the man in black didn't pay any attention to him. He just slowly turned around and opened his mouth. An extremely dazzling, strong light shot out instantly, lighting up the entire night sky. John was temporarily blinded by the strong light. By the time he rubbed his eyes, the man in black had long since disappeared. The next day, Caleb drew a picture. John took it and looked at it. It was a yellow sun. He figured everything out in an instant. He came to the astronomical observation station and called up the latest data. The result was just as he expected. The sun was about to erupt an unprecedented super flare. This energy would instantly penetrate the Earth's ozone layer. Everything on the surface would be burned to ashes. Any underground shelter would be useless. Learning the truth, Diana broke down directly. She insisted on taking the children to a remote underground cave to hide. John's persuasion was of no use at all. While the two were arguing, static suddenly came from Caleb's hearing aid. Immediately after, Caleb was like being controlled, picking up a pen and writing frantically on the table. The pen tip broke, so he used his fingers to dig hard into the tabletop. This scene was exactly the same as Lucinda 50 years ago. John pushed his son away and interrupted his actions. Looking at the unfinished numbers, John suddenly remembered the scratches left by Lucinda on the basement door. He suddenly realized that there must be the final coordinates to avoid the disaster on that door. After doing all this, John immediately ran to the school and removed that door. He entered the coordinates into the navigation and found that the location was actually Diana's mother's old house. He hurried to tell Diana, but Diana had already taken advantage of his inattention and driven away with the two children. Diana had completely lost her mind at this time. She only thought about going to the cave. Midway at the gas station, the car was stolen by someone in the chaos. The two children were still in the car. Diana went crazy trying to grab someone else's car to give chase. She ran a red light directly at the intersection. As a result, she was hit and sent flying by a crossing heavy truck. When John followed the clues and found her, Diana was already lying in the ambulance without breath. John held her hand, which was gradually turning cold. He found that she was clutching a black stone in her palm. John understood that the children were taken to the old house by those men in black. He arrived at the open space of the old house, only to see black stones all over the ground. His son Caleb and Diana's daughter Abby were standing there safe and sound. Surrounding them were all those eerie, white-haired men in black. John held his gun, wanting to take his son away, but Caleb shook his head. He said these men in black were not here to hurt them. They were the ones who left the prophecy. Then, the sky suddenly blew a strong wind. An alien spaceship descended slowly. This image directly brought the doomsday atmosphere to its peak. That sense of oppression from a high-level civilization made John, as a top scientist, feel weak in the knees, and he knelt directly on the ground. The spaceship released a light ball. The men in black shed their human disguise, revealing translucent, glowing entities. They signaled that it was time for the children to board the ship. John rushed forward suddenly, begging the aliens to take him away too, but the aliens were completely unmoved. The rules were clear. Only selected pure children could go. This is definitely the most cruel psychological gamble in the whole film. As a father, John faced an unsolvable deadlock. Keep his son, and everyone gets scorched by the sun together. Send his son away, and the father and son will never see each other again. John suppressed his tears, took off his necklace and handed it to his son. He lied to Caleb, saying he was going to heaven to find Mom. In the end, John did not choose to selfishly tie his son to his side to be buried together. For the sake of the child living on, he would rather bear the despair of eternal loneliness himself. The father and son made a final farewell with their exclusive gesture. Under John's gaze, the two children followed the aliens into the light ball and slowly rose into the interior of the spaceship. Subsequently, the spaceship left and disappeared into the depths of the universe. John couldn't hold it anymore and fell to the ground, weeping bitterly. The next morning, the sky had turned an eerie blood red. The ozone layer began to rupture. The entire city fell into complete madness. People were running for their lives everywhere, and cars were burning. John drove his car numbly. He didn't go to a shelter but went back to his father's house. John's father was a priest. The two had always been estranged because of their differing philosophies of science and theology. But in the face of the end of the world, all disputes lost their meaning. The father and son embraced each other tightly. With a dazzling, strong light sweeping across the Earth's surface, buildings vaporized instantly. The entire Earth turned into a sea of fire, and in the distant outer space, two children were running on a new planet covered with golden plants. They walked towards the great tree that symbolized life. The movie ends here. There is no hero saving the world, and no miracle occurs. This is the most frustrating, yet clearest disaster movie I have ever seen. Therefore, the most direct takeaway from this movie for ordinary people is to let you learn to accept your own powerlessness. Since we simply have no say in the big environment and life, death, illness, and old age, then stop struggling with the broken things that cannot be changed. You see, John didn't go crazy or lose it in the end. Instead, he let go to let his son seek life, and went home to embrace his father, with whom he had been at odds for years. This is the answer. When encountering a hurdle that truly cannot be crossed, admit your own insignificance. Reconcile with life, and stay with those closest to you. Since we cannot decide the ending of our fate, at least we can maintain our dignity when facing a desperate situation.